Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtottara Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhaishanaravindra Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtottara Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samaveta Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jainitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, today we're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form, text number 7. Please repeat. Savai Vishvasrijam Garbo Savai Vishvasrijam Garbo Deva Karmatma Shaktiman Deva Karmatma Shaktiman Vibhabhajatmanatmanam Vibhabhajatmanatmanam Ekada Dashadatrida Ekada Dashadatrida Savai Vishvasrijam Garbo Deva Karmatma Shaktiman Vibhabhajatmanatmanam Ekada Dashadatrida Savai Vishvasrijam Garbo Deva Karmatma Shaktiman Vibhabhajatmanatmanam Ekada Dashadatrida Saha, that, Vai, certainly, Vishvasrijam, of the gigantic Virat form, Garbha, total energy, Deva, living energy, Karma, activity of life, Atma, self, Shaktiman, full with potencies, Vibhabhaja, divided, Atmana, by himself, Atmanam, himself, Ekada, in oneness, Dashadha, in 10, Trida, in 3. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Abhay Sriman Nrsimha Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: the total energy of the Mahat Tattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself, by himself, into the consciousness of the living entities, the life of activity, and self-identification, which are subdivided into 1, 10, and 3 respectively. Purport: consciousness is the sign of the living entity or the soul. The existence of the soul is manifest in the form of consciousness, called Jnana Shakti. The total consciousness is that of the gigantic Virat Rupa, and the same consciousness is exhibited in individual persons. The activity of consciousness is performed through the air of life, which is of 10 divisions. The airs of life are called Prana, Apana, Udana, Vyana, and Samana, and they are also differently qualified as Naga, Kurma, Krikara, Devadatta, and Dhananjaya. The consciousness of the soul becomes polluted by the material atmosphere, and thus various activities are exhibited in the false ego of bodily identification. These various activities are described in Bhagavad Gita 2.41 as Bahu Shakha Hi Ananta Cha Buddhayo Avyavisayanam. The conditioned soul is bewildered into various activities for want of pure consciousness. In pure consciousness, the activity is one. The consciousness of the individual soul becomes one with the Supreme Consciousness when there is complete synthesis between the two. The monist believes that there is only one consciousness, whereas the Sattvatas or the devotees believe that although there is undoubtedly one consciousness, They are one because there is an agreement. The individual consciousness is advised to dovetail with the Supreme Consciousness as instructed by the Lord in Bhagavad Gita 18.66. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. The individual consciousness, Arjuna, is advised to dovetail with the Supreme Consciousness and thus maintain his conscious purity. It is foolish to try to stop the activities of consciousness, but they can be purified when they are dovetailed with the Supreme. This consciousness is divided into 3 modes of self-identification according to the proportion of purity. Adhyatmika, or self-identification with the body and mind, Adhibhautika, or self-identification with the material products, and Adhidevika, or self-identification as the servant of the Lord. Of the 3, Adhidevika self-identification is the beginning of purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desire of the Lord. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapati Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Mitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapte Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhye Vacha Patithanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so we're continuing on with our transcendental discussion on the creation of the material universe by Vishnu. Krishna doesn't get directly involved, but he expands himself into Vishnu to not just create, but Srishti Sthiti Pralaya. He creates, he maintains, and he destroys as well. So just as Krishna expands himself into Vishnu to create, similarly Krishna also expands himself, Vishnu also expands himself into the Guna avatars, Brahma and Shiva, to further create the secondary creation, as well as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu will expand himself into Kshirodakashaya Vishnu to maintain, and the same Garbhodakashaya Vishnu will then also expand himself into Lord Shiva, who governs the destructive aspect. Avyaktadini bhutani, vyaktamadhyani bharata, avyakta nidanani eva. Krishna tells to Arjuna that everything in the material world, this material energy, is destined to form itself into different objects which remain for some time and which get destroyed after a period of time. So we have to remember that the sarga creation, right? There's sarga and visarga. The sarga creation is the preliminary creation. The visarga creation is the secondary creation. The preliminary creation, the sarga creation, has 2 aspects to it. The first aspect we discussed in the previous chapter at great detail. The first aspect of the sarga creation, the preliminary creation, is the glance of Lord Mahavishnu at the pradhan, which then activates the pradhan to differentiate itself, diversify itself into the Mahatattva. So we've had several classes on the different aspects of the Mahatattva, the 23 elements, 24 if you include the soul, 25 if you include the super soul. Then the second aspect of the Sarga creation, the preliminary creation, is what we're discussing here right now. It's when Mahavishnu expands himself into Garbhodaksha Vishnu, enters within each universe, right? And then he creates a material blueprint of himself called the Virat Rupa. He creates a blueprint of himself. This is before the creation of Brahma. That's why it's called the Sarga creation. And when he creates a blueprint of himself, that's the blueprint that Lord Brahma is going to use to create all the different life forms. So here we're seeing that all the living entities, like in, I think it was last verse or the verse before, it was telling about how Hiranyamaya, maybe it was yesterday's verse, Hiranyamaya. So this Lord Garbhodaksha Vishnu was lying on the waters of the universe, within each universe, and all the living entities were lying with him. So they're lying with him. So now the living entities have been injected into different universes, and they're lying inside the body of Mahavishnu, inside of the body of Garbhodaksha Vishnu. Now for these living entities within each universe, who are lying in the body of Garbhodaksha Vishnu, for them to be injected into different life forms, individual life forms by Brahma, first of all, Garbhodaksha Vishnu has to create a blueprint. And I remember listening to a lecture by Sadaputta Prabhu many years back, and he was saying, so why is it that all different life forms, right, all different 8.4 million species of life, they all have eyes, they all have ears, they all have nose, they all have the facility to walk or, mobilize themselves from one place to another, they all have the facility to eat, drink, reproduce. Why isn't there just some completely different species which exists? And he said, this is a sign of intelligence by the Creator. He creates a blueprint or some sort of a framework, and then all Brahma has to do is just create different types of bodies, which may vary in size, they may vary in what they're composed of in terms of whether it's a gross body or a subtle ghostly type of body, or color or shape. They may vary in these aspects, but essentially every living entity has the working senses, the 5 working senses, and the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. So that's the blueprint that we're looking at. The total energy of the Mahatattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself by himself into the consciousness of the living entities. Now, here it's talking about life of activity, self-identification, and the consciousness of the living entities. When we take birth, right, when we are a newborn baby, we come out of the womb of our mother. The first person that embraces us is our own mother, right? Like the doctor takes the baby out of the womb and immediately places it into the arms of the mother, so who lovingly embraces her child. And we have personal experience that sometimes when the baby slightly even grows up and the baby is given by the mother into the hands of the father, then the baby might start crying. So then the father, he doesn't know what to do, so he gives the baby back to the mother, and the baby gets pacified. So the baby doesn't know anyone except for, his or her mother. And therefore he develops a very close, loving, affectionate bond with his mother. And it's not until the mother actually tells her child, that this is actually your father, right? Srila Prabhupada gives this example. It's not until the mother actually tells the child that this is your father, that the child can then have a relationship with the father. So you can take it that the mother is like the secondary creation, right? The seed is already given by the father. So in the same way, the seed of the living entities has already been given by Mahavishnu, by Garbhodaksha Vishnu, into the womb of the universe, which represents Maya, which represents material nature. And then, just as when the baby is born, the baby comes and gets embraced by the mother and has a very close, affectionate bond with the mother, and the only person really that the baby is interacting with, largely, is its mother, not so much its father. The father is still maybe providing for the baby by going out working and maintaining the family like that, but the mother is right there with the baby, in close contact, taking care, nurturing the child like that. So in the same way, we are born into this material world, and all we can see and experience is material nature. which is the mother. Right? We can't see spirit with our senses. We can't experience something spiritual with our material senses. Therefore, all we can experience in this material world is material nature. And just as the baby therefore has a very close relationship with the mother, we as living entities, conditioned living entities, also develop a very close binding relationship with material nature as well. We can't see who is the father. Right? So the father was like it says in the Bhagavatam, karmana deva naitrana jantur deho papadye. It says that the living entities are injected into the womb of the mother they travel through the semen of the father into the womb of the mother. But the mother, because the mother's role is to develop the material body, and because all we see is matter and interact with matter, we think that the mother is the source of creation of us, of our body. It's true, the secondary aspect of creation, but the primary, the cause why our body was formed within the womb of our mother in the first place was because of the father. So in the same way, the original cause of the creation and our existence as individual living entities right now here in this material world is Mahavishnu. And Srila Prabhupada also says that the mother is the Vedas or the Shastra, and the father is Krishna or Vishnu. So it is the duty of the mother to tell her child who is the father. So in the same way, the Shastra, like Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, they are to be considered to be our mother because they are revealing to us who our father actually is, who Krishna actually is. So that's one thing. Now, this verse and the purport that Srila Prabhupada has given is primarily focusing on three things. So remember now, the living entities which are inside Garbhodakaya Vishnu, they're about to be put by Brahma into different living forms. So that sort of development is going on here. So the translation is actually saying the consciousness of the living entities are subdivided into one. The life activity of the living entities are subdivided into 10. And the self-identification of the living entities are subdivided into 3. So the last line of this Sanskrit shloka, that's the most, that's the focal point of this shloka. Ekada, Dashada, and Trida. In other words, oneness in 10 and in 3. So in regards to oneness, Srila Prabhupada is saying in the second paragraph of the purport, he's saying that the monist believes that there is only one consciousness, whereas the Sattvatas or the devotees believe that although there is undoubtedly one consciousness, they are one because they are in agreement. Right, so so basically the Mayavadis think that the supreme consciousness, which is Krishna, and the consciousness which is there within our own bodies is the same. And therefore they think that everything is equal, everything is God, everything is Brahman. But the Sattvatas or the devotees, they understand that there is an individual infinitesimal consciousness, and then there's a supreme, all-pervading consciousness, the supreme consciousness, and they are different. How are they different? They're different in quantity, but they're the same in quality. But there is still oneness between them, and that oneness is oneness in desire and oneness in agreement. In the Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma says, Bhasvan yatashma sagaleshu nijeshu teju swiyam kiyat prakatayati apitadvaratra brahmaya esha jagatanda vidana karta govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. Right? So it's a very nice verse. Now, Lord Brahma himself is speaking the Brahma Samhita, and he's saying this verse about himself. Now this verse, it says that there are certain kind of gemstones, it's mentioned in the Vedic literatures, and they're called Suryakanta. Now what these Suryakanta gemstones do is they give off a really bright effulgence, really bright light. How do they do that? They do that because the sun, with its sun rays, it energizes these gemstones, so that when the sun is not there anymore, these gemstones give off a bright effulgence. Just like how you have the solar lights that they put in the gardens, or some glow-in-the-dark toys or something like that. You leave it in the sun, and the sun infuses these torches with its energy, which gets stored, and then in the absence of the sun, they give off light. So these Suryakanta jewels, Brahma is mentioning in this verse in the Brahma Samhita, they get charged by the solar energy of the sun, and then they give off the energy of the sun. So Brahma is saying, in the same way, I, Brahma, I do not exhibit my potency of creation independently. Just as the sun empowers these jewels to shine, in the same way, it is Krishna, it is Vishnu, who has empowered me with his potency to be able to create. Therefore, I am not to be considered the primary creator, I am only to be considered the secondary creator. And therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances to Govindam, Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Now, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mentions in the purport there, he says that there are two different categories of Brahma. When there are living entities which are qualified to take up the position of Brahma, then that particular jiva gets enlisted on the throne, enlisted into that position to act as Brahma, to act as the creator of the universe and the original Brahmana of the universe. But whenever there is no jiva who is qualified to take up that position of Brahma, then Krishna himself comes and becomes Brahma for that particular universe. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mentions, and we were having a seminar about this during the Sunday feast before the lockdown, about the different 64 qualities of Krishna. And we learned in the seminar that the first 50 qualities of the 64 qualities that Krishna has, these 50 qualities are there present within ordinary living entities as well, like you and I. And then qualities from 51 to 55 are possessed by Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. So they have the first 50 qualities plus another 5, 51 to 55. These are the powerful universal controllers. So they have extra 5. And then from 56 to 60, these qualities are held by the Vishnu avatars, different types of expansions of Krishna. And then the final 4 qualities, 61 to 64, are qualities that only Krishna possesses. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says that Brahma and Shiva have the first 50 qualities in full. Then the next 5 qualities, which are mentioned in the Nectar Devotion, in the chapter titled Qualities of Krishna Further Explained. So quality 51 is changeless, quality 52 is all cognizant, 53 is ever fresh, 54 is Satchit Ananda Vigraha, and quality 55 is possessing all mystic perfections. So he makes a distinction between Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. He says that although both of these personalities are indeed powerful controllers of the universe, Lord Shiva has invested with him an even greater degree of divinity than Lord Brahma. Because Lord Shiva is not a jiva. He's somewhere between Vishnu Tattva and Jiva Tattva. He's somewhere in between. He has his own Tattva. Whereas Brahma himself is a jiva, but he's a very empowered jiva, right? Almost like a Shaktivesh avatar, empowered to create the universe. So he says that because Shiva has more divinity within him, Lord Shiva contains these extra 5 qualities from 51 to 55 in complete fullness. So Lord Shiva has the first 55 qualities in fullness. Whereas Lord Brahma has the first 50 qualities in completeness, but qualities 51 to 55 he doesn't have in complete fullness like Lord Shiva does. So that distinction is made by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And that goes to show that obviously that Krishna is on a completely different platform, as is Lord Shiva, compared to the living entity. So how is Lord Brahma's consciousness dovetailed with Krishna, and how is he one? Because Krishna wants the universe created in a certain way, and Lord Brahma at the beginning of creation sits down on the lotus, the 1,000-petal lotus coming out from the navel of Garbhodaka Shri Vishnu, and after performing tapasya for 1,000 celestial years, He meets with Krishna directly, and Krishna tells him that this is how you should create the universe, and he listens to Krishna's wish. He fulfills Krishna's desire. Therefore, although Brahma is a different, separate individual consciousness compared to Krishna, he is one with Krishna because he fulfills his desire. And this, Srila Prabhupada often quoted from the Bible in this regard. He quoted Lord Jesus Christ in the Bible, who is said to have said, my will and my Father's will. No, what is it? Thy will be done. Not my will, but thy will be done. Something else he says. He says, I and the Father are one. So this is in the if you look at the book of John, the Testament of John, it's mentioned, I and the Father are one. So I actually looked up the context of this verse, and what's happening here is, like, when Jesus is saying this, he's actually talking to a group of, you could say, non-believers. And he's saying to them that, look, I'm performing these great miracles and activities on behalf of God, on behalf of my Father. And there are many sheep, and he calls sheep refers to his devotees or his disciples or people who believe in what he's doing. And my sheep are following me, but you're not my sheep, you're not part of the flock because you don't have faith in what I'm doing. And these sheep have been given to me by my Father. And no one, because they've been given to me by my Father, no one can take them away from me. These sheep cannot be taken away from me, and because they've been given to me by my Father, no one can take them away from my Father, because the Father and I are one. And later on he goes to say that the Father is within me and I am within the Father as well. So we can understand this, that Lord Jesus Christ is like a guru, right? A separate individual soul, just like you and I. And his Father is the Supreme Soul. His Father is Krishna, the Supreme Soul. Now when he says, I and the Father are one, it means that he is fulfilling the exact wish and order of his Father. And because they're one in agreement, Srila Prabhupada is saying, they are one because they are in agreement. Their desires are the same. Tasyaite katita hyarta prakashante mahatmana. It says in the Shastra. It says that yasya deve parabhaktir tata deve yata deve tata guru. One who has implicit faith in the words of the Guru, the spiritual master, and in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate purport of the Shastra is revealed to him. So this is what Lord Jesus Christ is exemplifying here. And also this is, someone asked me a question recently. We went to a house program, again before the lockdown, and they're asking, so you know in Bhagavad Gita, the start of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying to Arjuna something which seems a little bit contradictory or a little bit bewildering. He says in the 9th chapter, texts 4 and 5, he says, text 4 says, Mayas tatam idam sarvam jagat avyaktamurtina matstani sarvabhutani na chaham teshva vasthita. This is what he says. Translation is, by me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. Then in the very next verse he says, and yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. So Krishna is saying that all beings are in me, but I am not in them, and everything that is created does not rest in me. How do we understand this? Well, the first verse, text number 4, when he's saying that all beings are in me, but I'm not in them, he's referring to his energy. He's referring to his Brahman aspect. All beings are in me means that this whole universe, which is there, that also represents Krishna. Because it's this material energy. Krishna's energies are inseparable from him, and they can't act without Krishna's potency, which is exactly the theme of what we're seeing in Srimad Bhagavatam right now. The theme of life comes from life. It's Krishna at every stage who's giving his glance, who's giving his consciousness, which is making material energy work. So that's where this original idea, concept of life comes from, life is coming from. So we are present right now within Krishna because we are present within material nature, which is Krishna's energy, which is inseparable from Krishna. We are present within Krishna's Brahman. Then he says, yet everything that is created does not rest in me. So how does that work? That means that although Krishna is present here and we are within Krishna in the form of Krishna's energy, at the same time Krishna has a personal form, a Satchit Ananda Vigraha form, which is present in the spiritual sky in Golok Vrindavan. And because Krishna is there in his personal form, and we are here in this material world, that means we are not within Krishna. So we are within Krishna's energy. In that way, all beings are in Krishna. But we are not within Krishna's personal form in Golok Vrindavan. So in that sense, Krishna is aloof from the material creation. At the same time, he's non-different from the material creation in the form of his energies. So when it says here in this particular verse that that consciousness of living entities is one, what we mean is the consciousness of the living entity and Krishna's consciousness, the supreme consciousness, are different, but they're one in the sense that the living entity is supposed to dovetail his consciousness with Krishna's, in Krishna consciousness. This is the natural consciousness of the living entity. That's why Srila Prabhupada says, he says that this Krishna consciousness, this Maha Mantra, is not an artificial imposition on the mind. It's something very natural to the soul. Right, so that's the first one. Then the second thing, the second part of this purport is saying the life of activity is subdivided into 10. Right, so there's a particular Upanishad, it's called the Prashna Upanishad. And it's one of the Mukhya Upanishads, just like Ishopanishad, one of the primary Upanishads. And this Prashna Upanishad is exactly that. It's Prashna means question. And it consists of 6 questions which are being asked to one Muni. I think it's Pipalana Muni or something like that. So they're asking questions. And the questions are something like, how did creation begin? What is a living entity? The third question is, how do living entities get embodied within material nature? What sustains the life of the embodied living entity? Why should we meditate? And what is the purpose of meditation? And the last question is, what is that which is indestructible and eternal within the embodied living entity? So these are the 6 questions which the Prashna Upanishad discusses about. Now this Prashna Upanishad goes into detail as to the different life of activity in terms of the air. Now I just want to read a purport from the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Srila Prabhupada briefly touches upon this. So it's chapter 4, text 27 in the Bhagavad Gita. The translation is, others who are interested in achieving self-realization through the control of the mind and senses offer the functions of the senses and of the life breath. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the life breath, which are 10 in nature. Prana, Apana, Udana, Vyana, Samana, and then there's 5 more. There's Naga, Kurma, Krikara, Devadatta, and Dhananjaya. So 5 plus 5 is 10. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is writing, the yoga system conceived by Patanjali is referred to herein. In the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, the soul is called Pratyag Atma and Parag Atma. As long as the soul is attached to sense enjoyment, the soul is called Parag Atma. But as soon as the same soul becomes detached from sense enjoyment, it is called Pratyag Atma. So the whole goal of the yoga system, according to Patanjali, is to go from being a Parag Atma to a Pratyag Atma. When one realizes that one is the soul and not the material body, not the mind, then in that liberated state, one becomes a Pratyagatma. And the way that they come to that stage of being a Pratyagatma is through mechanical means. And one of the fundamental means is through pranayama. Ayama in Sanskrit means to extend or to elongate. And prana refers to the life air, the life energy. Now Srila Prabhupada says that the soul is floating within the body on these 5 types of airs: prana, apana, vyana, udana, and samana. Towards the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada is saying, this pratyag atma is withdrawn from activities in matter. The senses interact with sense objects like the ear for hearing, eyes for seeing, nose for smelling, tongue for tasting, and hand for touching, and all of them are thus engaged in activities outside of the self. They are called the functions of the pranavayu. It is the pranavayu, it is the pranic air, which is causing us, believe it or not, to be able to act. This is one of the fuel. This is one of the energies within our body which is causing us to act on a physical platform as well as a subtle platform. And I'll explain. Srila Prabhupada says, the apana vayu goes downwards. The vyana vayu acts to shrink and expand. The samana vayu adjusts equilibrium. The udana vayu goes upward. And when one is enlightened, one engages all these in searching for self-realization. So the control of these 4 vayus is called pranayama. Now, this Prashna Upanishad, as I was mentioning, it goes into detail about these. So it explains that prana, which is the main air, the main life air, its function is to drive things and propel things forward. So anything that we're doing in our life right now, whether it's moving our body forwards, whether it's thinking about the future, desires which are arising in our mind to make us act, to propel us, that's a function of the pranavayu. All our organs, our heart is beating in a certain way, it's propelling forward with each heartbeat. This is all functions of the pranavayu. This pranavayu subdivides itself into 4 other functions, which is apana, udana, vyana, and samana. The apana vayu is the vayu which acts downward, as Srila Prabhupada was mentioning, and the region in which it acts is from the navel downwards to the feet. So this is the locality of the apana vayu. It goes downwards from the navel to the feet. And its function, as is mentioned, is downwards. So on a physical platform, whenever we, for example, when we're passing stool or urine, or the reproduction when a baby is being delivered, these are all functions, these downward functions are all functions of the apana vayu. So the apana vayu is moving downwards. On a subtle platform, when we let go of negative emotions, right, when we try to forget things, let go of negative emotions and feelings, this is also a function of the apana vayu. Its movement is downwards, to release, to let go. Then comes the udana vayu. The function of the udana vayu is to move upwards. So it's functioning from the navel upwards to the head. And it moves upwards. On a physical platform, the udana vayu is responsible for standing up. So the function which allows us to stand up erect. The growth of the body, which is another upward movement. On a subtle platform, for us to have strong willpower, positivity, optimism, all these are functions, because they're going upwards, all these are functions of the udana vayu, as Upanishad says. So that's udana vayu. Then comes the vyana vayu. So the samana vayu. So next is samana vayu. So samana vayu, it goes from the peripherals of the body to the center of the body. Okay, so its function is more churning. So it's going from the outside, so from your arms, from your extremities. That vayu is moving inwards to the center of your body. Right? So again, to summarize, apana is going downwards, udana is going upwards. Samana vayu is going from the sides to the center. It's coming towards the navel. And it's responsible on a physical platform for things like digestion, for things like the assimilation of air and oxygen within the lungs. So the air is coming from everywhere from outside and is being drawn to the center of the body. These are functions of the samana vayu. On a subtle platform, the samana vayu allows us to assimilate emotions and experiences from outside and take them inwards into us so that we can contemplate on them. So whenever we experience different things on the outside world, then all these things, they come, and then we start to contemplate on them within us. So we take things from outside, different emotions, desires, whatever are coming, and then we assimilate them, we bring them into us. That's a function of the samana vayu. And then finally, the vyana vayu, its function is circulatory. Its function is circulatory. So the vyana vayu is responsible on a physical platform for things like the circulation of the blood through the different veins and the arteries. It's responsible for the breakdown of food and its nutrients being transported to different parts of the body for energy. Responsible for transporting oxygen at different parts of the body. So it's more circulatory. It's moving from the center outwards. So samana is moving from outwards inwards. Vyana is moving from inwards outwards. And on a subtle platform, the vyana vayu is responsible for circulating thoughts into our mind. We all have experience of that, right? We think of something and then it goes away, and then the mind again will bring that thought again. Past memories will bring back after many, many years, many, many months will bring back. That reoccurrence of thoughts and emotions from the past, that's a function of the samana vayu, of the vyana vayu. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains what is the function of these other 5 vayus, Naga, Kurma, Krikara, Devadatta, and Dhananjaya. He says, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the Naga vayu is responsible for belching or burping. So again, these are different movements of the air. So Naga vayu is responsible for belching. The Kurma vayu is responsible for the opening and closing of the eyes. And I was thinking about that. How is that, how is opening and closing of the eyes a function of an air? And the way I could conceive it is like this. Like if you have a closed room, and this closed room has like a flap door. If you increase the pressure, air pressure in the room, then what's going to happen to that flap door? It's going to swing open. Whereas if you suck out the pressure from the room, so if there's low pressure in the room, then that flap door is going to come inwards. Right? Just like when we breathe in and out. Low pressure in our lungs, high pressure outside, vice versa. That works in the same way as well. So there's some sort of subtle pneumatic system going on. So that particular air, the kurma air, is responsible for opening our eyelids and closing our eyelids. And we read about that, right? Srila Prabhupada says that there's demigods responsible for all the different functions. Now there's 49 different types of airs. Here we're just discussing the 10 primary types of airs. And I'm not sure if it's related, but there are the 49 maruts, the 49 demigods. They're also demigods responsible for the air, right? I'm not sure if they're the demigods who are related to these 10 types of airs and the overall aggregate 49 types of airs we're talking about, but most likely. So yes, so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Kurma is responsible for closing and opening eyes. Krikara is responsible for sneezing. So when we sneeze, the air moves in a peculiar type of way. It's an immediate forceful expulsion from our body. So Krikara is responsible for that. Devadatta is responsible for creating sleepiness through yawning. So again, when we yawn, that's a movement of an air in a certain type of way. So Devadatta is the type of air which is active at that point in time. And then Dhananjaya is interesting. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Dhananjaya is a type of subtle air which still lingers around a body at the time of death when the soul leaves the body. So when the soul exits the body, this Dhananjaya air, it still lingers around the body for some time, and it initiates the process of decomposition of the body. So Dhananjaya is responsible for the decomposition of the material body after the soul leaves the body at death. So we can study all this, but ultimately Brahma Samhita says, Pantastu koti shatavatsara sampragamyo vayoratapi manaso muni pungavanam sopyasti yat prapadasim nivijintya tatve govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. Well, Brahma says that the jnanis are thinking, speculating on the absolute truth. The yogis are drilling They're drilling the life air through pranayama. But even if they keep doing that for millions and millions of years, Lord Brahma says they'll only, if they're fortunate, they'll come to understand the tips of the toes, the reflection from the tips of the toes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's not important to practice pranayama. I mean, for health, devotees can do that. But to actually go into the practice to realize the Paramatma in that way is not advisable for bhakti yogis. It's not required. But here we're talking about these airs in terms of activities that the living entities. So any physical activity we're doing, any emotional thoughts, anything that's going on in our mind as desires and thoughts and feelings, the 10 types of airs discussed, they have an effect. So they're governing our activities physically and subtly. And then finally, Srila Prabhupada is saying self-identification is subdivided into 3. And he says towards the end of his purport, he's saying that the consciousness is divided into 3 modes of self-identification according to the proportion of purity. Adhyatmika, or self-identification with the body and the mind, that's the first type. Adibhautika, self-identification with the material products. And Adidevika, or self-identification as the servant of the Lord. And we see this breakdown of 3 in different parts of the Shastras. The most common is when Srila Prabhupada talks about the 3 types of miseries. Adhyatmic misery, klesha, is misery caused by our own body and mind. Adibhautika is by other living entities. Adidevika is miseries caused by the demigods. In second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, this same syntax is expressed by the Bhagavatam in terms of the governing of the senses. It's explained that the embodiment, the person who possesses the sense of sight, he's the Adhyatmic Purusha. The demigod who is responsible for the vision, for the eyes, he's the Adidevika Purusha. And the embodiment which is reflected on the eyes of the Adhyatmic person is the Adibhautic person. Right? For example, I have eyes, and therefore I am the Adhyatmic person. Now, in my eyes, your form, right, the form of a person, is being reflected. And therefore I can see you. Therefore you're the Adibhautic person, because you're the reflection of another living entity on me. So Srimad Bhagavatam explains that's the Adibhautic person. So these 3 things, Adhyatmic refers to the self, Adibhautic refers to others, and Adidevik refers to the demigods, or Krishna. So in this context, self-identification in terms of Adhyatmic means just thinking oneself to be the body and the mind, which is the most common identification. Most people, most materialistic people who are not in transcendental knowledge consider themselves to be the body and the mind. Then Adibhautik, Srila Prabhupada is saying, is self-identification with material products. So I was discussing this with a couple of the Prabhus yesterday, and we were trying to figure out what this means. Srila Prabhupada doesn't expand on it. And we didn't come across anywhere else in Prabhupada's books where he expands on it. But we sort of came to a conclusion that elsewhere Srila Prabhupada mentions that when one is born, right, when one is born, one considers himself to be the body and the mind. But then later on, as he grows up, as he or she grows up, then one extends one's sense gratification to family, society, community, nation, and then Prabhupada says international. One identifies oneself with the country he's in, with the humanity, with all human beings, like that. So identification with the material products means that, okay, now you're becoming more pure in consciousness. You're not just thinking about your own body and the mind, but now you're thinking about others as well. And ultimately, Adidevik, self-identification as a servant of the Lord, means when the conditioned soul finally comes to the realization that beyond thinking about others, other people, I have to think about the source of everything, which is Krishna. Right? So this is a very nice verse because it breaks down into 3 categories. As I was mentioning, the blueprint, it creates the blueprint for us, or for Lord Brahma rather, to create all the different living entities. And it explains to us how all our different activities on the physical platform and on the mental platform, and our consciousness as well, how it's subdivided into these different categories. So, technical class, but that's the nature of this topic. So we'll finish here. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.